Good morning. Good to see everybody this morning. We're in the book of 2 Kings now. If you've not been reading the text, then you're going to have to read the text after class to figure out what we did, because we're going to move along, and very rarely will I read the text. We're in 2 Kings chapter 13. We're going to talk briefly about Joash and Elisha. Jehoahaz died, and his son Joash began to reign. Joash, who is also sometimes called Jehoash, also worshiped the calves, but was somewhat successful in war. The inspired writer now takes a very important backward glance. We've already seen the death of Elijah, and yet, here we go, or Elisha, excuse me. This is sometime in his past, and Joash seems to have maintained a healthy respect for the prophet Elisha, finding time to visit him when he learned of his serious illness. Elisha commanded Jehoash to shoot an arrow through the open window to the east in the direction of the land beyond Jordan, where Hazael of Syria had taken from Israel, while both prophet and king held the bow. This act symbolized a victory that would come not by the hand of the king alone, but by that of a higher power. It was thus the arrow of the Lord's deliverance. Okay, so then you may remember that the prophet tells him to strike the ground with the arrows. And this striking of the ground, it looks like, demonstrates the anger of the king, the ferocity with which he wants to free the land of Israel. He strikes the ground 3 times. He's not very worried about it, is he? He's not really upset. If I was upset, I'd be, wouldn't you? That's the way I'd respond to it. And Elisha kind of gets mad with him. He says, if you just struck the ground repeatedly, you would have defeated the king of Syria. But now, because you only struck it 3 times, that you're only going to win 3 battles against the king of Syria. And of course, that's the way that will play out. Elisha then dies, and interestingly enough, God honors him in a most interesting way. This is in 2 Kings chapter 13, verses 20 and 21. Then Elisha died, and they buried him. And the raiding bands from Moab invaded the land in the spring of that year. So it was, as they were burying a man, that suddenly they spied a band of raiders. And they put the man in the tomb of Elisha. And when the man was let down and touched the bones of Elisha, he revived and stood on his feet. And so that's really an honor to Elisha, not to the fellow that was raised. It demonstrates his power even as a sign from God after his death. Joash was a capable leader, particularly in war. He recovered the cities that Aram, or we'd say Syria, had previously taken from Israel. His success, though, was only due to God's grace. Israel had violated the covenant God made with them at Sinai, but God spared them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And interestingly enough, this is the only place in the historical books where that promise is referred to, except in the prayer of Elijah on Mount Carmel. That's the only other time that this covenant is referred to by that specific name. Israel had violated the covenant God made with them at Sinai, but God spared them because of his covenant with Abraham, Isaac, Jacob. It's not insignificant that that's true. 3 victories fulfilled Elisha's prophecy, and then, of course, we're going to see the end of that. Amaziah, the son of Joash of Judah, reigns on the throne of Judah as a righteous king, but Jehovah is still worshipped on the high places. Please, please, please be careful reading the text, because you're going to run into duplicate names. Joash, for example, a duplicate name. You got one in Israel, you got one in Judah. And which one are you talking about? Well, read the text. That's what you're going to find out, which one you're talking about at that particular time. Amaziah had the murderers of his father slain, but he followed the law by not killing their children. Amaziah defeated Edom. He hired 100,000 mercenaries from Israel, but a prophet of God told him the Lord did not want them to go with him, so he released them to their great displeasure. And all this is from 2 Chronicles chapter 25, verses 6, really, and following. They, because of their anger, raided Judah, and then, of all things, for whatever reason, Amaziah worshiped the gods of Edom, and that made God angry, as you might well imagine. Amaziah challenged Jehoash of Israel to meet him face to face, which is kind of like saying, I'm calling you out for a gunfight at noon, something like that. And it's interesting that the response of Jehoash of Israel is to tell a little parable. And he compares himself to a giant tree, and he compares Amaziah to a thistle. And the thistle can be just trampled on by animals and be crushed. And he basically is saying, you got too big for your britches. You beat Edom, but you're not going to beat me. It's basically, Amaziah doesn't pay any attention to it. He attacks, and God worked against Judah because of what? Because he had worshiped the gods of Edom. God caused them to suffer a terrible rout. Amaziah was captured, and a section of the wall of Jerusalem was broken down, about 180 meters, which would be approximately 600 feet. All the gold and the silver of the temple and the palace was confiscated, and hostages were taken. At this time, Judah became subject to Israel. I don't know that there's another time, really, in that history, but that's the case here. Jehoash died, and his son, Jeroboam II, took his place. After 15 years, Amaziah was slain as he fled from Jerusalem. He was slain at Lachish. Azariah, the son of Amaziah, became the next king over Judah at the age of 16. Okay, Amaziah, interestingly enough, means in Jehovah is help. And Azariah, whose name also is Uzziah. If you read the book of Isaiah, you're going to see him called Uzziah there. So he's got two different names in Scripture, and that name means whose strength is Jehovah. So both names honor God. Of course, the first, the dad, doesn't really honor God, but the son does. At least a little bit he does. So he becomes the next king. He secures victories over Edom. Now then the text switches back. Now we're going to go back to the Israelite kings. And Jeroboam II, and by the way, he's not really Jeroboam II. We use that two to designate the difference between him and the first Jeroboam. That's all. He's not named that in history, but that's just the way to know who he is. He was Israel's strongest king, which is kind of interesting because it's very late in the history of Israel. He secured and extended Israel's borders, led the nation to become a world power. The northern boundary of Lebo Hamath was about 250 kilometers or 150 miles beyond the usual northern boundary of the Promised Land. And the Sea of Arabah was what we call the Dead Sea. Jeroboam II recovered for Israel both Damascus and Hamath, which seemed to have belonged to Judah. We can't tell that for absolute certainty, but it looks that way. Note that Jonah, the prophet, served during the reign of Jeroboam II, and he predicted that Jeroboam II would expand the borders. And you usually think only prophecy Jonah ever had anything to do with was his book. No, he was God's prophet. And he'll get in trouble later on his own, but for right now, this is what he did. Yahweh had not yet decided to blot out the name of Israel from under heaven, which is why he gave Jeroboam success. This image of blotting out, actually comes from an Egyptian practice, and the Egyptian practice was that they would take a papyrus. Okay, how'd they make papyrus? Well, papyrus was made out of a reed. And what they would do is they'd take a knife and they would split the reed. And then they would peel a layer off of the reed. Now that layer was very kind of grainy, I guess the way I'd put it. And it's just like any grain, like wood, it has a tendency to go a certain direction. If if you ever drive a nail in the wrong spot in a piece of wood, it'll split it right down the direction. You've seen that. I guarantee you. Some of you have seen that. Tim's nodding yes. He's seen that. So what you have is, of course, very grainy, and the grain runs up and down that layer, as it were. So they'd lay those layers out side by side and make what might be called a sheet. But now that wouldn't hold together. And so they'd take another set of layers and they'd lay those crossways. Now, as you can imagine, the inside of a plant is very sticky. You've cut into things, maybe out in your garden or whatever, and they're very sticky, aren't they? So those two layers will stick together. Now you've got one side where the grain goes this way, and the other side where the grain goes this way. And when it dries, that's what we'd call paper. But the interesting thing is that as that sticky dries and they write on it, and how'd they write? They didn't write with a ballpoint pen. They didn't write with a Sharpie or anything like that. They wrote by dipping their quill into ink. And so they would write across it. Now, here's the interesting thing. When they didn't have a lot of this papyrus. You couldn't go down to Walmart and buy a whole new ream of papyrus. Couldn't do that. They had to take the time to make it. And so if they'd used a sheet of papyrus and they were through with it, let's say you wrote your grocery list on it, for example. Well, when you get through with it, you take it home and you get a sponge and you just wipe it off because it's slick. It's kind of like you ever written over a piece of tape? And I'm notorious. I think I drag this finger when I'm writing, and I'll just basically erase it as I go, because my finger just drags over it and wipes it clean. Well, that's what they're doing. They're just taking that slick surface, clean it off, and write on it again. So what does God say about his people? I'm not yet ready to wipe you off. Now, he's getting ready to. Don't hold your breath, because it's coming, but not yet. He's not ready. Why? Well, again, because of his love for his people. And brethren, there's something we need to grab hold of as we read not just Kings, but really the whole Old Testament. That is, our God is patient. He's way more patient than any of us could be. He'll wait literally for years, giving someone a chance, or a group of people a chance to change. And if they change, think now about the book of Jonah. If they change, even if they're a pagan nation, like Nineveh was a pagan city, capital city, if they change, then God will accept their repentance, and he won't do to them what he said he's going to do. So very important to see the long-suffering nature of God. So because God is not ready yet to destroy or blot out the name of Israel, he gives Jeroboam II success. And Hosea however, calls them spiritual adulterers, thieves, and unthankful children. So when you read the book of Hosea, you're reading a prophet who preeminently wrote to the north. And how does God describe them in that? Well, he describes them as adulterers. Now, we need to pay attention to this, not because we, generally speaking, will worship an actual idol in the sense they would. Something carved out or something formed by a tool. We don't, generally speaking, do that. But when we put anything above God, it becomes an idol. And when it becomes an idol in our lives, we're committing spiritual adultery. I didn't say physical, I said spiritual adultery. And it's very important to notice that, because God will not, He will not forever bless you if you're going into spiritual adultery. We got to maintain faithfulness. And that's what's being demanded of them, but they don't do that. Amos wrote also to the north, and he saw the oppression of the poor, the injustice, the immorality. The people loved wealth more than kindness and ease more than righteousness. Now, ease more than righteousness. Does that happen today? Well, I'm going to tell you something. I am so thankful. I'm dead serious about this. We have among the very best live streams in the whole brotherhood. I know that because during COVID, I had people contact me from all over the country saying, we watch your services on Sundays. You guys know how to do it. Well, it ain't you guys. It's those guys back there that know how to do it. I'm thankful for that they do. So I'm very thankful. My wife this morning, and I think Shannon Brown is with her, they're watching by internet. That's the only way they can do today. Especially Teresa. Shannon could have come here, but she's helping Teresa, and I appreciate it. But they're watching by internet. It's a blessing. We got other people that watch by internet. You take the parishes and Teresa Berry. They're watching by internet today. I know that. I'll guarantee you almost that Teresa's already said, hello, good morning, Teresa Berry and the parish is here. You know, watching. It's marked on the Facebook. You can see that she's watching. It's a blessing, but it's a curse. Because during COVID, people learned that they could worship that way, and they don't join us. And brethren, I'm telling you something, that if you can be here, you ought to be here. Why? Because of the wonderful strength of being with brothers and sisters. We've got a great blessing when we are together. Now, if you've got to be away, that's a different story. But if you don't have to be away, get up, quit being lazy and loving laziness more than you love God. Okay? I'm sorry. If you wish to chastise me later, okay, you won't be the first to chastise me, I can guarantee you. I'm too old. I've been chastised before, but I think we need to look out for it because it's something Amos warned about, love and ease more than righteousness. Well, Jeroboam II died, and his son Zechariah, now watch out, he becomes king. This is not Zechariah the prophet. This is Zechariah the king in Israel. And you got to keep these distinct as you make your way along. Azariah, remember that's Uzziah, defeated the Philistines, the Arabians, and the Amorites were in subjection in part because of a strong army. Why do I say in part? Because you never win without God. That's just the simple truth of the matter. He was a good king. You could also notice 2 Chronicles chapter 26, especially the end of verse 5, except he did not remove the high places. Now, the high places in the days of Solomon, before the temple was built, were used to worship Jehovah. But once the temple was built, those high places should have been removed. Sometimes the people worshiped falsely worship Jehovah on the high places. Sometimes they worship false gods. Either one's wrong. It doesn't matter which one you're talking about. It's wrong. The Lord struck him with leprosy. Why? I mean, really, the writer of Kings only tells you he had leprosy. You have to go to Chronicles to learn why, because in his pride, the king went into the temple to offer a sacrifice. Now, who gets to go in the temple to offer sacrifices? The priest. Now, this king is not a priest. Instead, what is he? Well, he's from the tribe of Judah. And when you get to the book of Hebrews, you learn that Jesus couldn't serve as a priest in the temple on earth. Why not? Not of the right tribe. And the writer of Hebrews argues that very strongly. Well, Uzziah got too proud, and he went in to offer a sacrifice. He was struck with leprosy, and his son Azariah took care of the house. He ruled over the house, and really, he judged Israel. Why? Well, nobody could go visit his dad. He's a leper. He has to live in a separate place and everything. He's in isolation, I guess we would say. Azariah died, and his son Jotham reigned. Zechariah, son of Jeroboam II, reigned 6 months, and he was evil. Now watch how fast these kings of Israel go now. They just go bang, 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 for the most part, very, very quickly. 6 months, he was evil, and so Shallum assassinated him, and the prophecy regarding Jehu was fulfilled. What was the prophecy? That his rule be wiped out. Now, if you watch, the nation of Israel has 20 kings, but it has multiple dynasties. It has the dynasty of Jeroboam, it has the dynasty of Omri, and so forth. You want to track these various dynasties that it had. And God would wipe them out every time. If the dynasty was not faithful, and by the way, there is not a faithful king in the whole history of Israel. Not one. So you don't have to worry about, was he a good king or a bad king? You just write down evil. Every time you see a king of Israel, just write evil, because that's going to be right. You're going to get it correct. If you ever have a test on it, just if it's an Israelite king, just put evil. You guarantee you get that answer right each time. Shallum reigned 1 month. He was killed by Menahem, who came from Tirzah. Remember, that was the former capital of Israel. We'd already read that in 1 Kings 16. Because Tifsha, and that's a city, by the way, in case you don't know that, refused to yield to the new king, he violently attacked them, imitating an atrocity only committed by neighboring nations, which was what? He ripped open the bellies of women who were expecting children, and he killed both the child and the mama. And God does not like that, I guarantee you. And by the way, this is the only Israelite king ever accused of that I know of. Only one. It's this one. Very, very evil. Shallum. In 2 Kings 15, 17-22, Menahem was an evil king, presumably as punishment for his wickedness. The Assyrian king Pul, that's the way it's designated in the text, P-U-L, who is historically known as Tiglath-Pileser III. And you'll see references to him in 1 Chronicles 5:26. Came against Israel around 743. Menahem was able to buy him off with a tribute, now listen to this, of 1,000 talents of silver. That's equal to 37 tons. Would you like to have that if the dollar ever goes bad? Yes, I would like to have that. In fact, I'd take a half of that. It'd be okay with me. But that's what he gave. How did he get the money? Well, he didn't get it for himself. He taxed the people. So he's typical of some politicians. You need money? Reach in the pockets of the people. They say about some politicians, they'll say, how cold it is in Washington? And you say, no. And I say, it's so cold that politician's keeping his hands in his own pockets. So this king didn't keep his hands in his own pockets. Pekahiah, Menahem's son, was evil. He was killed by one of his own captains, a guy named Pekah. Pekah was also evil, and Assyria came and took Naphtali into captivity. And notice this, we're starting now to see Israel go into captivity. First tribe. Now we've only got 9 left. Naphtali is gone, taken into captivity during the reign of Pekah. Pekah was killed by Hoshea, not Hosea. Please notice there's a slight difference there. Hoshea, who is Israel's last king. He's their 20th king. Jotham, the son of Uzziah, was a good king, but he failed to root out idolatry and unauthorized worship in Judah, though the chronicler remembers him as a mighty man who ordered his ways before the Lord in 2 Chronicles 27:6. In addition to a gate in Yahweh's house, one that separated the palace from the temple, Jotham repaired some of Jerusalem's walls. Remember when they were torn down? See, we looked at, we already saw that. He also established new towns in Judah. He erected additional defenses and was successful in subduing the Ammonites and extracting tribute from them for 3 years. And that's again according to 2 Chronicles chapter 27, this time verse 5. Judah began to be harassed by the kings of Israel and Aram. And again, Aram is Syria. Just trying to keep this ball game straight to the best of our ability. During the reign of Jotham, Ahaz, Jotham's son, was the next king. And some of you in your notes are going to have the wrong word next. It's probably going to say Jotham. That's a mistake. It should say Ahaz. See, it's corrected up there because when I restudy all this stuff, I catch my stupidity sometimes. Not always, but sometimes. Okay, so Ahaz walked in the ways of the king of Israel, even worshiping Molech. Now, that is a tragedy. To my knowledge, this is, of course, they had wicked kings in Judah occasionally, but this is one of the worst. Because he goes right down that same road that of all things the Israelite kings went down. And when I used to teach young men that were or older men too, that were getting ready to preach, we'd hit a certain spot in a class, something would come up, and I'd say, look, I'm old. Don't go down that road. You'll get hit by the bus. Because I'd been hit by it. But some of them have gone on down the same road anyway. And what happens to them? They get hit by the same bus I got hit by. Why did he not learn? Why can he not look and see? And brethren, the reason the Old Testament is here is so that we can learn. Don't go down that road. When you go down that road, you're in trouble. Guaranteed. Every time that's what's going to happen. Okay, so Rezin, who's king of Syria, and Pekah, who's king of Israel, besieged Jerusalem but failed to conquer it, with Rezin only capturing Elath, where the Edomites then dwelt. From that day forward, they dwelt there. Ahaz sent a present. Now you got to watch that word. In the rest of the Old Testament, that's called a bribe. It is not a present. He's bribing him. And what is he bribing him to do? He sends it to Tiglath-Pileser, who is king of Assyria, of all things. Guess who is going to be a conqueror and do all kinds of damage to God's people? Tiglath-Pileser, whatever. He bribed him and got him to come down and attack these two that were attacking him, the Syrians and the Israelite people of the north. He gets them to attack him. Well, that's right up Tiglath-Pileser's alley, because he intends to conquer Syria and Israel anyway. So if I get paid to do it, how much better? I was going to do it anyway. Is kind of the way he might have viewed it. Tiglath-Pileser listened, going against Damascus, took the city and slew Rezin the king. That's the fall of Syria. It's gone now. Israel also took many captives and spoils, but the prophet Obed and certain princes procured their release. King Ahaz went to Damascus to see Tiglath-Pileser, where he saw an altar, the design of which he sent to Urijah, who was the priest in those days, and he wanted to make a copy, and of all things he did. A priest of God made a copy of a false altar. And it didn't stop there. Urijah built the altar. Ahaz sacrificed to the gods of Damascus on the altar. That's what the chronicler tells us, 2 Chronicles 28. He altered Jehovah's appointed vessels, and he closed the doors of the temple. Well, that's not a big surprise. He's not worshiping God anyway, so why not shut the doors? That'd be the easy answer. Ahaz died. They buried him in Jerusalem, but notice that it specifically says, not in the tombs of the kings. See, so the people kind of got the idea, this guy, he's not what God wants him to be. And they buried him accordingly. And in place of him, his son, a fellow by the name of Hezekiah, becomes the next king. We're going to see something about Hezekiah's attempt, and really somewhat successful, at restoration, bring them back to God. Hosea, we're going to go now. See, we're shifting gears. We're going back to Israel. We've been in Judah for a little while. Let's go back to Israel. That's the way the writer of Kings does. He bounces back and forth, and he roughly keeps these people in the same time frame. If you'll watch him, he'll even refer to it and let us know what he's doing. Hosea, having killed Pekah, reigned as an evil king of Israel, and Shalmaneser, who in Hosea is called Shalman, and in Isaiah he's called Sargon. So he's got three different names in Scripture. He is the king of Assyria. So now Tiglath-Pileser's gone. We've got the next king there. He threatened Israel again and reaffirmed Hosea as his vassal. In other words, if you don't get in line, I'm going to come down there and whoop you. And what does he do? Yes, sir. Where do you want me to go? What you want me to do? That's what Hosea does. He gets back under the rule of the Assyrian king, or the dominance of. Hosea, though, didn't like it. And so he appealed to Pharaoh So. That's the way he's called in Scripture. He is likely to be identified with Sorkon IV. He appealed to him for relief, and that happened in about 725, or just 3 years from the fall of Samaria. And so that's why we kind of know who we're talking about in Egypt, because we can track all this now historically. You follow this right down the line in the history books, if you want to. And it matches up very, very well with this text that we're reading. Hosea the prophet, by the way, criticized him for that. Why? Because if you're going to go to battle as God's people, you don't need a foreign king. You don't need a big army. If you don't believe that, ask Gideon. He had an army of 300 and went up against an army of over 100,000 I'd say, with God on your side, you can win. And that's what Hosea, the prophet, says. You can win without all this. You don't need this. But the problem is that this king, Hoshea, is evil. He doesn't trust God. I'm not even sure he really believed in God, but he sure doesn't trust him. That's a guarantee. And that is therefore a sign of unfaithfulness. You're not really faithful to God if you turn to a foreign king or to massive armies to win a battle. That's the idea. His failure to give tribute to Shalmaneser resulted in Hoshea being cast into prison. Samaria and the surrounding region were decimated, and the 10 of Israel's tribes were exiled to the upper Tigris-Euphrates Valley, never to return. Okay, so very briefly, if you can imagine in your mind that area, first of all, notice that if you're kind of thinking about the Mediterranean Sea and you're looking at it this way, you just kind of draw a U that's laying on its side. That's the Mediterranean Sea. Okay, down in the lower part of the U, before it makes the turn to go straight down the coast where you find Egypt, that's where you see Israel, especially in the northern part of that area. Okay, right above that, I say right above, several miles, you see two rivers. And if you look over to the east, you see that they basically come together. But then they run out like a U themselves. That's the Tigris and the Euphrates that we're talking about. So where is Israel sent? North and a little bit east. And they're done for. That's it. No more of these tribes. Now, let me ask you a question. Are these tribes lost? Does God not know where they are? Oh yeah, he knows where they are. And he will talk in his prophets about bringing them back home, but in a totally different way. It's under the rule of the Messiah. That would be Jesus, by the way, is who we're talking about. There is a religious group in this country, and now all over the world, that talks about the 10 lost tribes of Israel ended up coming to the United States and became the American Indian. Well, let me tell you something. That is a high-class form of baloney. Okay? That's what that is. Don't believe it. Not true. God didn't lose these tribes. He knows exactly where they are. Has this writer write about them? He knows where they are. They're up in the Euphrates River Valley. That's where they are. That's where they were sent into exile. Horner lists the sins of Israel as, and this is in the text in Kings, 2 Kings 17, they served false gods, they refused to hear Jehovah's prophets, they rejected Jehovah's statutes, and they sold themselves to do evil. Those are their sins. Now here's the tragedy. God's patience ran out with them, but then the text tells us Judah followed right down the same road. You know, you would think that when Israel fell, that Judah awakened. But no, and God's going to write about that through his prophets. He's going to talk to them about that very thing. The sons of Israel, the 10 tribes, walked in all the sins of Jeroboam. Now, isn't that a tragedy? Can one leader set the stage for God's people to go astray? The answer is yes. Brethren, don't ever, ever, I don't care if it's me, don't ever tolerate a false teacher for a minute. He will lead the church astray if you let him. And usually they're very charismatic. People love them. Better look out. Because what they need to love is the truth, not the man. And very important to realize that. So because they followed in Jeroboam's sins, the Lord finally removed them from his face. He thrust them out of the land of the Lord as he had threatened them all through his prophets, namely from the time of Jeroboam onward. And we've got a list of all those prophets that's given by Kyle. That's a pretty good little list. And it shows that God had warned them. They just didn't pay any attention to the warning. That's the problem that we have there. Assyria repopulated Israel with people from Babylon on the Euphrates. Now, Assyria was one of the smartest countries in reference to getting rid of their enemies. And they would do it by beating them in battle, and so some died there. That's true enough. But how else did they do it? They would deport them. They'd take them out of the land they're familiar with, and they didn't just put them in a new land, they'd put other people with them. Now what happens? You begin to lose your culture. That's what happens. When you have a whole bunch of people that come in who are unfamiliar with the practices and the culture of the nation, and you allow them to intermingle, what's going to happen? Well, people are going to change their whole culture. Now, did you know, look, check your history books. Did you know there came a time in the United States when we literally went years without letting anybody come into this country? I'm not talking about to visit. I'm talking about to be a citizen. Didn't let anybody do it. Why? Because the president at that time said, we want to give the people who have come in time to assimilate, to become a part of us. Just think about it. I say no more. Look, and I'm not voting for anybody, and I'm not telling you what. Truth is, folks on both sides have messed this up big time. Okay? So I'm not voting. I'm just telling you that's what happens. The Assyrians knew better, and they did better. So what did they do? They brought people from Babylon, and they put them in Israel. They brought people from Cutha, which is located 20 miles northeast of Babylon. Later became one of the most important cities of the Babylonian Empire. Ava was probably an Elamite city, and then Seraphim, was a place of uncertain location. We don't know where it was. But they brought all these people into the land of Israel. What happened when they came in? They started getting eaten by lions. And you might say, why is that? Well, that's pretty easy. Because God is basically saying, I'm still in charge here. This is my land. It's not anybody else's land. And so what did those people do when they began to have problems? Well, information was passed to the king that the proper manipulative religious rites, I love the way that's worded, were not being performed to pacify the god of Samaria. That's little g because they didn't recognize big G, okay? That's all. The only reason that's there. Sargon responded by selecting one or more of the deported priests to teach them how to worship this particular deity. Now, I want you to look at the text. I've given you the verses to look at. And here's what it says. The priests taught them how to fear the Lord, and they feared him. That's in verse 28, 32, 33, and 41. And yet, they did not fear the Lord. That's in verses 33, 34, and 41. Okay, how do you rectify that? Sound like a contradiction in the same chapter, doesn't it? Okay, here's how I rectify it. And I'm following Winters. The people indeed feared the Lord superstitiously, but in the sense of reverential fear, awe, love, and obedience to the covenant law, there was a total dearth. They feared him basically they trembled. They were scared of him, but they didn't respect him. But God allows them to live that way. And of all things, I'm giving you back 45 seconds.